A tornado index of 8 just appeared over Quebec. That number belongs in Oklahoma, not July. Meanwhile, 29 million Mid-Atlantic residents are now in the crosshairs of a major Friday severe event. And one single locked jet stream pattern is now driving 10 straight days of cascading hazards. A storm system that dropped tornadoes across Saskatchewan and Manitoba is now pivoting hard southeast, because that Canadian energy is diving directly into northern New England this afternoon and evening, which means Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and upstate New York face a rare and serious severe threat. Storm Prediction Center placed a Level 3 enhanced risk across Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont today. But here is the number that made forecasters stop. STP hit 8 near Quebec at 5 p.m. today, because STP of 8 would be a headline number in Kansas or Oklahoma during spring storm season, which means seeing STP of 8 over far northern Maine in July is flat out wild, because that index flags the potential for significant EF2 plus rotating tornadoes, and 8 is extreme. Forecasters show a 15% tornado probability with a significant tornado hatching across the risk zone, and a 30% wind probability hatch for gusts hitting 75 to 80 miles per hour. That is hurricane force wind coming out of a thunderstorm, the kind that can flatten trees instantly. And hail over 2 inches carries a hatch significant flag too. Every hazard in today's threat is serious. Margaret in Lake Charles is watching this whole setup closely because Gulf moisture fuels all of it. Storm energy levels of over 3,000 joules per kilogram are building this afternoon near the Quebec trough. Rotating supercells are expected to fire across far northern Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Quebec. Storm timing: Presque Isle and Clayton Lake face the threat between 6 and 8 p.m. Eastern tonight. Then storms push through Berlin, New Hampshire, and toward Bangor and Portland roughly 9 to 10 p.m., which means overnight those storms should begin to weaken as they approach Nashua and Greater Boston. So the window of greatest danger is this afternoon and this evening across far northern New England, because in 2021, a similar northwest flow setup drove EF2 and EF3 tornadoes across Pennsylvania, which means this is a known pattern, and when the numbers line up like today, it is dangerous. And those numbers are aligned about as well as forecasters have ever seen for July in this region. Meanwhile, slow-moving cells across southeast Florida are producing efficient heavy rainfall and flash flood risk. And central Montana faces hail and damaging wind on the northwest ring of fire edge of the ridge. So now shift south, because the biggest active flooding crisis in the country is centered on Texas. Because WPC just upgraded to a moderate risk of excessive rainfall for the San Antonio corridor. And that moderate risk extends west of San Antonio through Wednesday and Thursday, a multi-day brutal setup. Because a high-resolution rainfall model is printing numbers approaching 3 feet of rain near San Antonio, which means 24 to 36 inches of rain are on the table for portions of south-central Texas. Flash flood watches and warnings are already active across the Texas Hill Country tonight. Dale in Toledo is watching the Texas rainfall model outputs and cannot believe the numbers on the screen, because WPC forecasts 6 to 10 inches for the Hill Country with a 40% flash flood probability. And Hill Country limestone simply cannot absorb that much rain. Every drop runs straight into canyons, which means flood rescues will be happening across Texas canyons and river crossings over the next 72 hours. Training storms keep repeating over already saturated ground, which means there is no recovery in between. Austin, Del Rio, and areas west of San Antonio face the highest life-threatening runoff and flooding risk. STP of 829 million Mid-Atlantic Friday. 10 straight days of hazards. We are just starting. Now shift west, because this is where the engine powering everything on today's weather map actually lives. A massive dome of high pressure is parked across the plains and Intermountain West, running historically hot, because Salt Lake City pushed near its all-time record high of 107 degrees over the past few days. And Billings, Montana approached 108 degrees temperatures, rivaling the hottest readings ever measured there, which means at the peak of this heat dome, some areas were running 25 degrees above normal. And pushing entire regions 25 degrees above normal requires a historically powerful and deeply built ridge. Because this ridge is clocking in at 600 decameters, near record-breaking territory for mid-July standards. Frank in Springfield is watching this dome and says it is the most bonkers mid-July pattern in years. Because temperatures of 100 to 110 degrees are baking the west, with locally even higher readings reported, which means all-time records are being challenged from Montana all the way to Southern California today. But this dome is more than a heat story. It is the engine behind all East Coast chaos. Because on the eastern flank of that ridge, winds aloft turn sharply out of the northwest and accelerate. And those northwesterly winds form what forecasters call a high-speed conveyor belt in the upper atmosphere. Which means that conveyor belt is what drives Canadian storm energy down into New England's unstable, humid air. And it is what steers the Friday through Sunday severe clusters southeast down the Interstate 95 corridor. Because a stronger dome means faster northwest winds aloft, which means more shear and sharper storm organization. So western record heat directly fuels the east severe threat. They are one and the same story. Which means western heat and eastern severe weather are one wave, not two separate stories at all. Forecasters call this setup a dipole heat dome on the west, a deep trough on the east. And that dipole is producing the high-speed northwest flow regime driving this entire 10-day cascade. Because storm-generating disturbances out of Canada are being aimed like a fire hose at the East Coast. Which means one conveyor belt is producing multiple different kinds of disasters depending on where you stand. Earl in western South Dakota has watched heat records shatter all around his region this entire week because this is one of the most powerful mid-July ridges that region has seen in many recent years. And it is stubborn. It refuses to weaken for days, which makes it so gnarly. After today's Act 1 in Maine, this pattern does not switch off. It just reloads and shifts south. Because the northwest flow conveyor now turns its full attention toward the mid-Atlantic and northeast. And it does not let go for 4 straight days, a siege. Not a single storm. Sandra in Alexandria is watching the Friday setup very closely. The mid-Atlantic is squarely in the bullseye. Because the Storm Prediction Center drew a severe risk for D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, Raleigh, and Virginia Beach. And 29 million Americans live inside that Friday mid-Atlantic risk zone, and Friday is only the first day. Heat indices near 100 degrees are loading up from D.C. to Philadelphia. Flat out dangerous fuel for Friday. And central North Carolina is baking at 100 to 105 degrees, serving as the fuel for Friday storms. Which means that warm, humid air is loaded like a spring when the disturbance dives in. It fires. Because straight-line damaging wind is the primary Friday threat, with gusts potentially topping 70 miles per hour. So if you live in D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, Raleigh, or Virginia Beach, Friday evening is your alert window. Here is the full cascade Maine today. Mid-Atlantic Friday, Midwest Saturday, Southeast Sunday, Coast Monday. And Saturday, the European model strongly favors a gnarly severe weather outbreak across the Midwest because Minneapolis, Iowa, Wisconsin, and the greater Chicago corridor are in the Saturday primary target zone. All hazards of severe weather are on the table Saturday: destructive winds, large hail, and tornadoes. And Sunday, a Great Lakes low drives another full round through the Ohio Valley and East Coast. Which means tornadoes are explicitly on the table again Sunday as that complex pushes southeast. And Sunday also opens a southern front, a slight risk zone covering eastern Georgia and the Carolinas. Because 13.7 million people, including Charleston and Columbia, face potential gusts over 60 miles per hour. which means the Sunday threat slides into northern Florida by Monday, a complete East Coast sweep. And Monday brings yet another potential round from Alabama all the way up through the northeast states. So that is one jet stream pattern methodically working the eastern half of America for 10 straight days. And the wind is only half the threat. The other half is serious water and ongoing flooding potential. Because training thunderstorms are already threatening flash flooding across the Mississippi and Ohio river valleys. Rainfall rates inside those training storm cells can exceed 2 inches per hour over the exact same spots. And even away from severe events, the same pattern is ringing out above normal rainfall across the east. Because the 10-day rainfall outlook shows above normal totals across the northern Gulf and eastern United States, which means flooding is a serious and standalone hazard in the east, even before anything tropical gets named. Comment your city below. Tell us if any of these hazards are heading toward your neighborhood, and let us know which city or region you want covered in detail. We read every comment. And now something is quietly trying to organize over the warm waters of the northern Gulf of Mexico. Because that stalling cold front is forecast to sag directly into the Gulf of Mexico by Friday. And when a weather boundary stalls over 85-degree Gulf water in summer, the atmosphere recycles it. Because energy cutoff beneath the ridge over warm Gulf water can slowly begin to spin up. Forecasters have a name for this. They call it homegrown development. Built from scratch, close to home. And the odds have been climbing steadily. European ensemble guidance is showing a real and rising signal. Early estimates put the Gulf Depression chance at 20 to 30% over the coming days. But European AI ensemble guidance is now showing a 40 to 50% development chance over 15 days. Which means this Gulf tropical situation has gone from a long shot to something forecasters watch closely. And the next name on the Atlantic storm list is informally Bertha, though nothing is designated yet. Because the European AI model flagged this setup first and has been persistent about it all week, it shows a weak low forming in the northeast Gulf, slowly deepening toward the mid-1,000 millibar range. In one scenario, that low reaches 996 millibars off the Florida Panhandle about 8 days out. And in that scenario, it becomes a landfalling tropical storm around mid-next week, and then meanders. Which means the meandering is the flood signal. A slow system over warm water dumps catastrophic rain. But the honest read today is this rising risk and real uncertainty, not a certainty by any means. Because when forecasters see that kind of model spread, the atmosphere genuinely has not decided the outcome. Some ensemble members recurve the system into the Carolinas. Others park it meandering along the Gulf Coast. And some members race it up the eastern seaboard, while a minority actually reach tropical storm strength. But here is the critical point. Regardless of whether anything gets named, the water is still coming. Because there is significant flooding potential from New Orleans east to Tampa no matter what the track does. And Florida is flagged as potentially the hardest hit, regardless of tropical development or no development. Which means watch the National Hurricane Center tropical outlooks over the next few days very closely. And if the trough scoops up that Gulf low, it boosts intensity and drives it toward the coast. 3 numbers to hold STP-8 in Maine today: 29 million Friday, 40 to 50% Gulf development. So let us walk through what this all means for major American cities over the next several days. Starting in Texas, Dallas and Fort Worth should brace for additional rounds of storms through Wednesday, because that stalled moisture belt is not leaving Texas anytime soon, and rounds of severe weather will continue. Houston residents face a dual threat: heavy upstream rain coming downstream, plus their own direct storm risk. Because the Brazos River and the San Jacinto River will keep rising through midweek regardless of local rain. San Antonio is already in the emergency flooding phase with moderate risk in effect through Thursday. Austin and the Hill Country face the highest flash flood risk of any American metro area right now, because every canyon in that region sits at or above full capacity, with even more rain still coming. Moving to the Mid-Atlantic, Washington, D.C. residents need to be ready for Friday evening severe weather, because the setup resembles the kind of derecho-producing pattern that has slammed the D.C. area before. Baltimore and Philadelphia face the same Friday risk window with heat indices near 100 degrees before the storms. Raleigh and Virginia Beach are also squarely inside Friday's severe risk zone, with damaging wind the main threat. And tell us which East Coast city you want more detail on. Comment your location below with us. Moving to the upper Midwest, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Indianapolis are all on elevated alert for Saturday because the European model is consistent about a significant severe event hitting that corridor Saturday night. Detroit and Toledo are also included in the Saturday target zone with all severe hazards on the table. And Fort Wayne, Indiana faces both the severe threat Saturday and potential heavy rainfall Monday as well. Minneapolis faces the most dangerous heat of any major northern city, plus the Saturday severe weather risk, because that city sits right at the intersection of the heat dome edge and the incoming storm energy. Pittsburgh and Cleveland face both the Great Lakes storm system Sunday and elevated heat index values midweek. New York City and northern New Jersey are on the outer edge of Friday's severe risk stay alert, because any fast-moving wind event on the Interstate 95 corridor impacts tens of millions of commuters. Boston and Portland, Maine are in the overnight weakening zone of today's supercells. Stay alert tonight. Moving South Charleston, Columbia, and Raleigh face the Sunday Carolinas severe risk with 60-plus miles per hour gusts, and Atlanta and the Georgia metro area sit in the southeastern target zone for that same Sunday system. Tampa and Orlando need to watch Gulf tropical development very closely over the next 7 to 10 days, because Florida is being flagged as the hardest hit region if that Gulf system makes any organized move. Miami faces both the southeast severe risk Sunday and the potential tropical flooding later in the period. Salt Lake City is still sitting near its all-time record temperature territory with no cooling relief yet. Phoenix and Las Vegas face ongoing dangerous heat, with overnight low temperatures barely dropping at all. Los Angeles remains under its extreme heat warning. Inland valleys are getting absolutely broiled. And Denver sits in the donut hole zone sunshine and brutal heat with no storm relief through Monday, which means cities in Nebraska, Kansas, the Dakotas, and eastern Colorado face unrelenting heat and no rain. And now the tropics picture extends well beyond the Gulf because the Pacific is also loading up. East Pacific tropical activity is gaining confidence because of El Niño conditions currently in place. Because warmer waters east of Hawaii and in the Central Pacific are becoming increasingly favorable, which means late July, specifically after around July 25th, is the watch window for the Hawaiian Islands. Some ensemble members are actually tracking potential tropical systems toward or across the Hawaiian Islands. And that is worth putting in the back of your mind if you have late July Hawaii vacation plans. Because tropical storm swells and heavy rainfall are legitimate concerns in that late July window. This is not something to panic about at 1 to 2 weeks out, but watch the forecast closely. And the West Pacific is actually suppressed right now from cooler water left behind by Super Typhoon Bavi. Because Bavi churned up cold water through upwelling across the West Pacific as it tore into Asia, which means East Pacific and Central Pacific storms, not the West Pacific, are the dominant tropical story. And the East Pacific is where confidence is genuinely building as El Niño keeps feeding those warmer waters. Meanwhile, monsoon moisture is surging hard across Arizona with Tucson and Flagstaff in the active zone, because that monsoon surge pulls all the way inland into southern Utah by the time we hit Thursday. Which means flash flooding and afternoon severe storms are a real threat across the desert Southwest. And the overall pattern for the next 10 days clearly splits the country into two very different zones. Heat dome core baking the plains and the Mountain West with sunshine and zero storm relief in sight. Meanwhile, severe storms, flooding, and tropical risk carve up the East Coast and Gulf in relentless waves. Because the donut hole of no rain, Dakotas, western Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, eastern Colorado, bakes dry. And this ridge will slowly retrograde westward by late July, with the core settling into the Four Corners, which means late July heat pressure shifts toward the Mountain West, while the East finally gets some relief. But relief for the East comes slowly and messily, with more storm rounds before any true pattern break. So every major region of America faces at least one serious life-threatening weather hazard this period. Heat north and west, catastrophic floods in Texas, severe siege on the East Coast, tropical potential south. And one single jet stream configuration is what connects and drives all four of those hazard families. So stay hydrated, limit outdoor time, and make sure you have a clear severe weather plan ready. Know your flood evacuation routes if you live near any flood-prone areas in Texas or the Gulf Coast. And if a tornado warning drops for your county, get to the lowest floor and away from windows. Check the National Hurricane Center tropical outlooks daily. The Gulf situation can change within 24 hours. Monitor local NWS forecasts for your specific city as the East Coast siege unfolds through Monday. And before we close, what city are you in and which of these hazards concerns you most? Comment below with your city and the hazard we read every single response, and it helps us improve. Tell us which region or city you want us to dig into in more depth next. STP of 8 over Quebec, unprecedented for July in northern New England. 29 million Americans in the Mid-Atlantic, severe risk starting Friday. 10 straight days of cascading hazards from one single jet stream pattern. And a Gulf system now showing 40 to 50% development odds in 15 days.